Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live chat. I've just been watching all the questions come through on the YouTube video chat function. I'm really enjoying that. I've been kind of logging in 30 minutes early and kind of seeing what people are asking, and just kind of a fun way to hang out. This week we did wavy line rulers or wavy rulers, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you weren't cussing me too much because there's a little bit more to think about with those kinds of rulers. More specifically, the point of contact between the foot and the ruler. So as it's changing, you might have noticed that maybe you veered off a little bit, or maybe you had trouble sticking right to it, but I promise it gets a lot easier with practice. So in this chat, I'm going to show you some quilted examples of wavy line quilting designs. Here's what I want to start with though. There are going to be not a ton of pictures, but a few pictures. And I just want it to be kind of inspiring. So don't let it be overwhelming. I know, sometimes I can be a little overwhelming. I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I do want to get you inspired and want you to think about how you can use those wavy rulers. Really, what I'm doing is just a couple of different techniques and mixing them all together. So whether I'm moving the position, whether I'm changing up the spacing, or changing the direction, those three things are really going to help create the different effects. Now, sometimes I'll do all three. Sometimes I'll just do one or two. So when you're looking at these samples, they might look like a lot of different things, but it really boils down to those three things, right? Changing the position, changing the direction, or changing the spacing. Really, that's could pretty much sum up the next 30 minutes. And then great questions that came through, so I'm excited to answer those. So let's get right to it with the presentation. So I'm going to go over a little bit first, what we saw in the challenge, and then I'm going to go right into some of the questions because I do have some pictures to go with it. But first of all, the wavy borders. So let's say you're thinking, maybe I just want to tiptoe into waves. Maybe I'm not ready to dive right in. I'm going to kind of group these from easiest to, I'm not going to say more complex, but just more steps. So in that dark blue border, what I've done is just quilted a couple of wavy lines that go along each side. I'm not even trying to turn the corner, right? I'm running it right off the edge. And and I know it's because it's easier to do that way. But if anybody asks me, I would say something like, I just love the juxtaposition of where the lines cross in the corners. But we know it's just easier to do it that way. So the nice thing about this is I'm working within a smaller defined area, right? I'm not having to reposition over the whole quilt. I only have to travel a little bit and echo once. So it's a good option for a smaller block. I wouldn't do this over the whole quilt, especially when you're first starting out, but definitely a fun option. All right, so let's move on to the jumbled waves, or the waves that we have kind of overlapping. Okay, so this one was funny, and I almost thought maybe I shouldn't even show this in the video because it seems pretty straightforward. But I think it's fun to remember that as long as you look like you meant to do it, it's fine. So if you're quilting your waves and you're having trouble getting them to line up, or maybe you're just trying to remember how to keep that point of contact between the foot, just quilt them so that they overlap. And the trick here is to make it not look so messy. So in this quilted sample, which I quilted up when I started filming, I have them overlapping quite a bit. But it's fairly consistent. I don't think one area really pops out more than the other, and I think it works. So overlap those lines. Now, in the video, I think I used two different sides of the ruler. You don't have to use the same wave. Switch it up. Try different waves. This is a great opportunity to practice, especially if you're doing this on a piece of busy fabric where you can't see the quilting anyway, or even if you're doing it on the panel, it's fine. Once you quilt it, you're not going to see all those lines. And I know that's the hardest part about all this when I say stuff like that, like, oh, just quilt it, and if you don't like it, just keep going. But I promise, once you put all those lines in there, they're all going to start to blend together. So quilting them so that they intentionally overlap is a fun option. It's definitely going to make the quilting a little bit more dense. So again, spread those lines out, leave a little space in between them, or you'll drive yourself nuts quilting them everywhere. Okay, next up would be the wavy crosshatch. Now, this is great because if you're quilting those echo lines and it's not working out, what are we going to do? We're going to put more wavy lines, except we're just going to change up the direction, right? So I have my horizontal and I have my vertical. Now, here's how I would approach this on a quilt. If I were doing this on my sewing machine, I probably would do all of one direction and then do the next direction. So why switch it up like that? Well, if I do all my lines horizontal, maybe I figure, I don't want to do crosshatch anymore. I'm done with this quilt. I'm over it. Well, maybe I could just leave it out. But if I start crosshatching, sometimes that means I might be committed to it. So I like to, wait till the very last minute to commit to that kind of thing. Another thing I love about this sample is those two waves, the horizontal and vertical, are actually two different waves. So using that wave F ruler, the horizontal is the much more steep wave and the vertical is the more shallow wave. I don't even think you can tell. I mean, I think that's what's fun about it. So don't even think that you have to do the same wave for both directions. And honestly, I'm not worried about where those lines cross each other. I'm trying to make sure that it's quilted consistently, right? I don't want any big gaps in the quilting, but I'm not spacing out or worrying if it's not, crossing right where it should. When you're done, you'll just have that nice all over effect. But let's say, I don't know, you do one direction and then you start your crosshatch and then you think, you know what, I'm kind of over this. Or maybe it's taking longer than you thought, or maybe you're on a deadline and now it's time to be done. You don't have to crosshatch the whole quilt. I think it would look really neat to have sections of, the overlap and then sections that don't. So you can kind of make it a choose your own adventure and add as much or as little as you'd like. Okay, now let's get to the mirror imaging. I hope that made sense in the video. That was one of those things that I can't over explain it because if I talk about it too much, it gets really confusing, right? So what I'm doing is I'm quilting my wave and then I'm just flipping it over so that they mirror image each other. Now, if you remember in the video, I talked about how you can still work from the same side of the foot by just varying, like where the lowest point is, that's where the highest point will go. If this was too confusing for you, try it out with a pencil beforehand. You won't have the same exact spacing, but sometimes that will help you, just like drawing it out, will help you get the idea of where the ruler, where it goes. But here's what's fun about that mirror image. It creates a really neat effect, right? I have that bigger area that's unquilted. It's gonna draw a little attention to that area, and it's fun. I think it creates a neat effect. Plus, it's less dense than just quilting lines over the whole area. So it's gonna allow you to kind of break it up. Now, what's fun about all the wavy designs that I'm going to be talking about is you can use them interchangeably. If you're working on a quilt, you could quilt a few lines mirror image. You can go back to regular lines. You can kind of change it up as you go. And I have an example of that here in just a second. But don't feel like just because you do one technique means that you're committed over the whole quilt. They're all wavy lines. It's going to look great. Just switch it on to something else. So in this particular example, I've quilted my line. I've echoed it. And then I've flipped it and echoed that. So that echoing is what's really kind of helping create that smaller and then the bigger. Now, remember in the echoing section, when we just talked about quilting regular echoes, if we want to change that spacing up, we need to make sure that it looks intentional. So in that area, that 1/4 inch echo, I kept it nice and close so that it would look intentionally smaller than my offset lines. I wouldn't worry too much about this, but it does make a difference when you're looking over the whole quilt. Does it? I always ask myself, does it look like I meant to do this? Even if I didn't mean to do it, does it look intentional? And if it looks intentional, it usually looks good. So if you can vary that spacing enough, you'll get that effect that you're looking for. So that means if you're having trouble keeping those lines consistently spaced, just keep on going, then kind of lean to that direction and really make them different. It'll just make everything a little bit easier for you. Okay, so now here's an example of just kind of stepped out a little bit more. We're gonna see this in a second when we get to the Q&A. There was a lot of questions about Elvira, so we're gonna talk about this. But here is the Elvira quilted, echoed, and then flipped, and then echoed and flipped. So I'm kind of following a routine here. Now what's different about this ruler is it's not a repeating wave. We're gonna talk about this in a second when we talk about it. It makes a different shape. Right? It kind of comes up at a point and kind of comes down. We talked about how to kind of find that repeat, and so we'll see this here in a second. But this is just a bigger example of a wavy kind of ruler quilted mirror image with those echo lines. Okay, so on the blue part, that little blue part on the side, the dark blue, here's another example of mirroring, echoing, cross-hatching with that same shape. So I just quilted the wavy lines, did my echo. So I'm just adding that third thing, right? I'm changing the spacing, I'm changing the position, and I'm changing the direction. So this is just all those three things together. So that's what I think is really cool about the wavy lines. You can just do it all over, or you can really start building up and doing some fun effects. Okay, this one, the bigger blue section, that is overlapped and mirror imaged. That's the only difference. The main thing about that, though, is it's spaced out consistently. So instead of the overlapping lines being random, like I did earlier in the picture earlier, they're much more spaced out more consistently. So that gives you that cool overlapping effect. So I quilted the line, overlapped it right on top of each other, and then did the same thing over and over again. Again, if you're not sure, maybe kind of playing with it a little bit will help you out, but this just goes to show you that being particular about the placement can create this more consistent effect. Okay, this one's one of my favorites. I'm curious to know what you guys thought about the rippled lines, or the kind of how they get closer and further apart. Now, I'll be honest, as I'm quilting, I kind of have to get my mind in the right place for wavy rulers, and this is kind of what my wavy lines tend to do unintentionally. So I'm like, well, I might as well just go for it. The trick here is every wave, we're going to shift the ruler one direction, the same amount each line. So here I did about 1/4 of an inch. You could do more or less. If you do too much, then you'll have a mirror image. But and that's what's going to give it that really neat effect where they get closer and further apart. Always make sure you're moving the ruler in the same direction. That was in the beginning when I started quilting with this design. I would forget. I would go left, I'd move the ruler left, get over here and think I need to move it in the direction I'm heading, and I'd go back this way. Oh, that does create a cool effect, but not that one. So if I'm moving the ruler always to the right, or always up, or always down, it needs to keep going that way. One thing that didn't make it into the tutorial is, if it helps, using some kind of glow line tape or some washi tape to kind of mark out that increment will really help you. So, but again, a really cool effect where I'm just changing the position of the ruler just ever so slightly to create that rippled lines. Now, this example, I took the picture, or I took the quilt sample in 2 different pictures, so it's a longer strip. But over here on the right, that's where I started quilting just those wavy lines, nice and consistent. But then as I worked my way to the left, then I started varying, making them rippled, but then also varying the spacing between the lines. Okay, so again, same 3 things, just a little different, and that gives me the rippled effect, but also those different echoes. All right, have you noticed when you're quilting, if you've tried this, have you noticed that maybe one direction your lines tend to be closer than the other direction? Oh, that happens to me all the time. And so this is me just embracing it. I'm just going for it, right? I'm not sure if that's a depth of field kind of thing, or if it's a dominant side kind of thing. I do know that if I'm quilting horizontally, my lines tend to be closer because I think I'm further than I am actually from there. So if you're having trouble keeping all directions the same distance, just embrace it. Just go for it. As long as it's consistent, it's going to be fine. But again, another example of how you can move just from your regular waves to those rippled ones. And then I could have mirror imaged or overlapped or did really anything that I wanted. So definitely have fun with it. Now in this sample, I was kind of cheating a little bit because it's just a quilted sample to inspire you. So I didn't even repeat the ruler. This whole sample is about this big. I just quilted along the ruler and then I'd shift it over, and I did have to get good at that repeat. But I think it's important to practice, and it's important to practice on what it is you're practicing. Okay, that sounded weird. But I didn't want to worry about trying to reposition the ruler to do really long lines. I wanted to get the effect and work on that. If I wanted to work on repositioning and quilting one long line, then I could have worked on that. So don't stress yourself out by trying to figure everything out at the same time. Pick one thing to focus on and practice that. Then, this is me practicing my ripples. And then next, if I need to practice on keeping it parallel, then that's the next thing I practice on. I think it's important to just, have fun with it. I know that sounds so easy for me to say, right? Because I do have fun with it. But if you have a ruler or a technique that you're wanting to learn, get a yard of fabric and just try so many different, variations of that ruler. Try it in all different directions, and then quilt and then cut out the pieces that you like. So I joke in my classes that all my samples are about this big, because I just cut out the good ones and bring them to class. So I think giving yourself permission to play a little bit. The panel serves a specific purpose though. The reason I have the panel is I'm giving you defined areas to fill in, and sometimes that's good practice as well. So definitely don't be afraid to practice, because with this, it's so much trial and error and just kind of finding out what it is that you like. Okay, how about this one? So this was in the quilting diagrams. I know it probably seemed a little confusing because I didn't address it in the video, but it was just too good not to include. Just because you paid for the whole ruler doesn't mean you have to use the whole ruler. So this is using just half of a ruler. So this was using Chevy, but what I was doing was quilting halfway and then positioning. So from low to high, repositioning, and that's giving me that stair step, right? You can do that with any ruler, even if I have like the Wave C. I could go low to high, reposition, low to high. It's going to give me this kind of stair step shape. Kind of fun, right? I will say on a long arm, it's a little trickier because we have a defined horizontal space that we can see, but on a sewing machine, you can just go forever. Now, knowing that, right, I'm repositioning halfway through, I'm not going all the way to the end. Then I'm echoing it, which is what you see here, but then I have spaces in between the echoes. This is one of my favorites because it's a lot quicker. I don't have to quilt that echo line. It just gives me a cool effect, but is faster. But then you can also quilt them in sections and flip them around and overlap them with the mirror image. Okay, so now this is just me showing off just a little bit, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Okay, the thing is, just showing you an example of how you can combine these three things and create those different effects. You don't have to remember how to do this right here, but just remember those three things we talked about, you can change them up and create so many different styles. All right, other ways to use wavy rulers that I didn't really touch on in the video is to create spaces or sections to fill in. So this, the black line, which I wouldn't normally quilt black, but I did so you could see it, it's my Wave A. It's a big wave ruler, so I quilted my wavy line. I quilted the next one so that it mirror imaged, but that they touched, and that's creating these consistent sections that I can then come back in and fill in with different free motion designs. You don't have to just do rulers or just do free motion. You can easily switch in between the two. This is a great way to take your bigger areas, break them up into manageable chunks, and then fill them in. So use your wavy rulers to break up your area so that you can fill it in with other designs. Or you can be a little bit more intentional. Instead of having those, kind of pod shapes, I could just quilt my echo lines further apart and then come fill it in with a different filler like wishbones. So let's pretend, hypothetically, that you're new to machine quilting and you are learning rulers for the first time. Well, soon you're going to be a pro. You're going to be really good at it, but then you want to learn wishbones. Well, then it's tricky to learn something new over a whole quilt, right? So do something that you know and then just throw in a little bit of something that you don't. I mean, if you're quilting that in just that little section, you can't really pass out from holding your breath, right? I don't know if you think that's funny. That's a joke I tell in my classes, and it usually kills. But you don't have to do hard stuff over the whole quilt. So leave yourself little gaps and come back and fill them in later, whether it's with a new design or a different technique. You can also use those wavy rulers to create vines or spines of your feathers. So here I've just quilted, especially if you want that feather to be nice and consistent. Or you can also incorporate it into other swirly designs, such as that. Okay, so this is just a bonus. When you're practicing, when you have all your rulers, if you collect rulers such as like I do, sometimes it's hard to remember what ruler looks like what or what you can do. I loaded a piece of fabric and I quilted out some samples, and then I also quilted the name of the ruler. You could write it on there too, but it's nice to remember because when you get done with all these samples, it might be hard to remember what ruler you created with that, or what ruler you used to create that effect. So either writing it on there or keeping track will help you out. And I did it over here too. So Wave C just helps me keep track of my samples. And I have them in a stack, and sometimes I just pull them out and look at my pretty quilted samples. So a great idea to kind of have all those quilting designs there for you to look at. Okay, we're not going to touch on this right now, but towards the end of the challenge, we'll talk about how to combine wavy lines with other designs. So here we're combining wavy rulers with clamshell rulers, and this is a lot of fun to create those pops, those little bit of a different texture. So it's a great combination. It works well with other rulers, works well by itself. They work well with free motion quilting. Just a really good option for you. Okay, I'm not going to apologize. I'm kind of a mean teacher. Have you noticed? I put you in predicaments so that you can work through them. And this was very intentional. Just know I do it for you, right? Okay, so did you notice the area that we're filling in has one straight side and one diagonal side, right? We're learning how do we echo or how do we reposition if it's on a diagonal. So I hope it made sense when I said, look, I'm going to leave the ruler in place. I'm going to travel on the edge, and then I'm going to slide the ruler directly over or directly up. I don't want to shift it to one side if I want perfect echoes. This being said, you're not always going to have a perfect square to fill in with your wavy lines. You're going to have to you don't have to. It will really help you if you get comfortable repeating your lines in those irregular areas. That diagonal side is going to be the first little tiptoe into learning how to reposition your ruler in that. So once we get that down, then we can start putting it around other things like those curves we just saw. So if you have trouble repositioning, just remember, even though I'm traveling along the diagonal, that ruler is still moving up or moving in the direction I'm heading without shifting over, unless I want it to shift over. So if that trips you up, try not to be too mad. It's really going to help you when you come along actual quilts. So there's that. Okay, so let's talk about Elvira real quick. So there was some questions about the lines on Elvira. And I'm going to just pause 1 second, make sure you can see. Okay, so the lines on Elvira, or let me back up. Let's say you have a ruler that's not a repeating wave. So most wavy rulers will, if you quilt end to end, will make a nice repeating wave. That's great. Some don't. This one doesn't because I wanted it to be versatile. I wanted to do other things. So if I quilt along it, I'm going to end on an up. I start on an up and I end on an up. So I'm going to get like a little point where they come together. Super cute. But what if you don't want that? If you have a ruler, what you need to look, and if you look on the kind of handout here or on the picture, I have these black lines. They're telling me, showing me exactly the lowest point, the highest point, and the midpoint. So all I have to do is find, like let's say the lowest point. I could quilt lowest point to lowest point and reposition, lowest point to lowest point and reposition. I'm going from the same points. So when I talked about, making a mirror image, if I'm at the high, that means the next time I'm going to reposition it, my quilting, I'm going to reposition it so it's the low is right there. Those black lines are just giving me reference points so that I know where to reposition. So in the handout, I'm going to go from start A to B. I'm going to end up over here, right? Well, I know that this is the midpoint, right? Because here's high, it's not the highest point. Here's low, it's not the lowest, it's this point right here. So when I shift it over, I can shift it to this one, or I can shift it to this one. So I'm going to shift it over to the second one over and then continue on. So all that diagram is just showing you with this specific ruler how you find the repeat. But even if you don't have Elvira, whatever one you do have, look for the same points. Now, this is what's cool about this idea. One of the questions was, when I'm quilting on my long arm, I get little tiny stitches as I'm getting closer or as I stop and start. Well, that's because we're repositioning and that's totally normal. But you can always change up that reposition. So if I always reposition the same spot every line, I'll have a little row of little stitches. Let me pause. If this is too confusing, just tune me out for a second, right? You're like, I don't know what she's talking about. But for those of you that are comfortable with wavy rulers and have seen this, what I can do is I know now I'm going to reposition. So I could quilt to the top, right? And then I could reposition to the next top line. This would be a better example. So I have I'm sorry, you can't really see it. So I have 2 lows and I have 3 tops. So I can quilt to my top and I can reposition back to my top. I can quilt to my low and reposition back to my low. So I can change where that repositioning is happening. Again, if that's too much to think about, sometimes I get so into these things, I just like to make it efficient. But varying the position from where you always transition the ruler will kind of keep it a little bit more hidden. Then it becomes little pops of texture as the little stitches are here and there. So again, if that's too much, sometimes I get too into the details and can lose everybody. But you can vary where you put your positioning or where you reposition if you find the similar spot on your ruler. Okay, so that's a quick answer of that. All right, so we're going to go into question and answer, but I wanted to address this with a picture. So one of the questions was specifically for long arm needles, what's with all the numbers on here? So that was one of the questions on the chat. And as much as I can talk about quilting and rulers, I could go on and on about threads, needle, and tension. I love it. I love talking about all that kind of stuff. So here's the thing. All of this is straight from Superior Threads website, superiorthreads.com. This is none of my information. I didn't take the time to make this little graphic. I just screenshotted it for you. But the most important thing to remember is you can find this on their website. But all these numbers have like a meaning, but they really don't matter for us. We just want to know what size we need. So if I switch again to the next one, sorry, let me move over here. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Well, there's all sorts of different things. Here's the most important one. Up at the top right where it says 90/14, that means it's a 14 needle. That's the size of the eye. The MR that's on the left at the bottom, that means it's a multi-ranger. It goes in a lot of different directions. That is specific. That's what we need. And then where it says GEBEDUR or whatever, that means that it's titanium coated. But the most important thing is you want to look for that MR and then the size. And the size of the needle you use depends on the kind of thread. So, and I also, this is for Rebecca, I found this on their website as well. It's a Longarm machine needle guide that will show you exactly what needles to order for your machine. So I know my head's covering up some of these, but I'll put a link to this stuff in the description box when we're done. But also it comes straight from Superior Threads. I mean, they have such great resources. You should definitely check it out. Okay, so that part kind of ends the slideshow portion of it. Hopefully that wasn't too much or too confusing for you. All right, so what we're going to do now, let me scoot that over. Let's talk about the Q&A, the things that came through, and see how everybody is doing. Sorry. I'm like the director and behind the camera, so I'm switching through all this stuff. Okay, so I love that you pointed out repositioning to avoid the stitching. Yes, so helpful, right? I always say I'm not good at, I don't think I'm a better quilter than anybody. I'm just really good at hiding my mistakes. Okay, so Judy asked the question about the Elvira ruler and Mary Rose, I think. So hopefully that makes sense. To go back to Elvira, I'm just looking at my notes. You can definitely get those handouts from the downloadable for this week's challenge, but they're also on my website as well, so you can check that out. Okay, Valerie asked, do I use the titanium Topstitch needles when I'm quilting with rulers? Yeah, I use those all the time. I love those. Again, Superior will tell you all about it, probably more than you want to know, but they're stronger, so they hold up a little bit more when I'm pushing and pulling, and they stay sharper longer. So I really do like those. Okay, oh yeah, Mary Rose, thank you. Don't forget to like the video. Yeah, like and subscribe, that always helps. I kind of forget the whole call to action thing. I just want to talk about quilting. So, okay, Kathy said she found the border of the square difficult to quilt with the rulers. And so I didn't know if it was the dark blue thinner border or if it was just, you know, that whole outside. Here's the thing, when machine quilting, especially on a sewing machine, gravity is our enemy. We don't like it. It's kind of like everywhere else, right? So even if I'm stopping, and I cut all this out of the video because it would just be boring to watch me shift the quilt, but I'm constantly pulling it up, making sure that it's not hanging down the edge of the table, because then I'm fighting gravity, and that's just really hard. So definitely keep the quilt up. Another thing that wasn't asked, but I have noticed in myself, when I'm quilting, let's say I have my ruler in my left hand and my other one on my right, I tend to start curving, right? So my right hand, my dominant hand, tends to push a little bit more. And so I have to constantly reposition and bring it back. It doesn't matter because the ruler is keeping me straight to the quilt, but if you notice that as well, it's just that you have that one dominant side. Oh, Kathy said the thin border. Okay, so that border, I'm quilting along it, traveling and coming back. And so then I wonder if it was the repositioning going to the next side. I just traveled over to the next one and then continued on, but you could break thread. Another reason is now we're starting to get towards the center of the quilt. Right? So we started kind of towards the top and now we're getting to the heavier part. So it just take your time. I promise it'll get easier. I have an extension table for my sewing machine, which I love. It really helps. It just keeps everything also up even with the quilt. So hopefully it gets easier. I promise with practice it does. All right, next question, Deb. Oh yeah, we talked about this. Too many stitches when starting and stopping on the long arm. I quilt in manual, so that happens naturally for me because I'll turn it off, or, I don't turn it off quite fast enough. It'll work itself out. I promise. I think varying the position would be the best option for that, or using a stitch regulator, or just knowing, like, I don't know, it'll be fine. Even if you do have a couple of stitches, as long as it probably happens every time, so it's going to look consistent. I will say using a matching thread color helps. So if you're, using a contrasting thread, that can be a little like, kind of overwhelming, but I promise once you're done and it's off, especially on the long arm, because that long arm keeps it so taut that it's just like everything is out there for you to see, right? Every mistake. But once you take it off and it eases and it kind of, absorbs into the quilt a little bit, it doesn't become as noticeable. So don't beat yourself up too much for that. Like I said, great questions, guys. Becky had the best question. I have never been asked some of these, but if I could only get one ruler, if I could only afford one wavy ruler, which one would it be? Now, I have to preface this. It depends, right? For me, I'm talking for me specifically, I would do Elvira or the Wave F. I love them both. I probably would do Elvira. I did design Elvira, so there is that. But Elvira does, the continuous curve, and it makes a different design than just a wave. But I would aim for a smaller, shorter ruler, so the nice and short, that has a wave. That's it. I mean, all those effects that you saw can be created with any ruler. They'll look a little different, but they can be created. But then she said, on the flip side, if money were no object, what wavy rulers would I get? All of them. Oh, well, maybe not. I do love my rulers, though. I like the Handy Quilter waves. They have, wave A, B, C, D, E, F. I would have all those. I don't have all of them. I sell them, but I don't have all of them. Just, it's fun to have a different wave because you never know what effect you want. But remember, it doesn't matter as long as you have something that creates a wave. But it was kind of fun. I took a moment and I thought, what would I do? If I were going to be on a desert island with my long arm with only one wavy ruler, which one would it be? So, kind of fun. All right, so that was the questions I kind of wrote down. I'm going to take a second and scroll through. Some people I thought was interesting. Some people said that they did better with the waves than they did the straight. Other people were like, "You're nuts." Totally normal in a class. We find different things easier. We all have different things that come easier, things that come more difficult. And so usually in a class, I like to change it up like this so that, if you're not good at straight, you're usually better at curvy. So that way you can kind of, if this one isn't yours, the next one might be, right? So totally normal. It's just something you just practice will get better. And if you think, well, I don't really love quilting straight edge rulers, maybe you don't. So try not to worry too much about it, but totally normal for people to like different stuff. Susan, I would give up cheese to get more rulers. I love that. I don't know if I'd give up cheese. I would say maybe. Stacy, this is a good question. Do I consider the sit-down machines long arms or sewing machines? Okay, I kind of use those words wrong. A sit-down long arm is technically a long arm. But when I'm teaching, I'm thinking, am I moving the quilt or am I moving the machine? Right? So when I'm demonstrating on the sewing machine, I'm moving the quilt. And so you can see, what that looks like. And then on the long arm, I'm moving the machine. So usually that's a distinction that I make. That's the more important one for me is, are you moving the quilt or the machine? But it doesn't matter as long as you practice. Roadie girl, are smaller waves easier for a beginner? Yes, shallower waves, so think shallow. The more drastic the wave, the more the point of contact changes. And if you have a shorter ruler, it can be less overwhelming. There's some wave rulers that are pretty long, but that might be the best. But it depends, everybody's different. So just start with one and see how you like it. Okay, totally off topic, you guys, but did you notice my pretty set back here? We've been filming the Midnight Quilter, the new series. It's going to start next month. It's going to start after the challenge. I'm so excited. And I've got to show you. Okay, so I just got this today, and don't email asking for it yet. It's not going to be available for sale yet. It'll be when the challenge or when the series starts. But look what I just got today. The Midnight Quilter. It's a wine cup. I'm so excited. So these will be for sale eventually, but I just think it's adorable. I just got it. And some other fun stuff, like I turn wine into quilts. Anywho, so be on the lookout for that. Kind of fun. It's been fun kind of getting back into that role. So, all right, that was off topic. Sorry about that. This is kind of how I am in real life. So the winner of this week's panel was Quintana Frazier, and I'll be reaching out to Quintana and letting them know that they can get it. The next giveaway is another panel from the first challenge, or from the Help How Do I Quilt It challenge. So that was the first one where I introduced my own panel. So we'll get that one. And what's kind of fun is that challenge, Help How Do I Quilt It, was announced a year ago tomorrow. So kind of fun that, thought we could celebrate the year anniversary of that challenge. So when we're done, I'm going to put that link into the description, and you can enter by just clicking on that link and putting your email address, and then I'll contact the winner, or I'll let the winner know next week at our live chat. Okay, so next week's challenge, we're going to be doing arcs. So arcs and creating motifs, and more importantly, learning how to use just part of the ruler. We don't have to use the whole arc, and we can reposition. So I'm kind of excited to see what you think about it. I'm switching up the filming style just a bit, so it's a little bit more back and forth. We'll see, and I think it's going to be a great time. I do appreciate you all hanging out with me and talking about wavy rulers and rulers in general. I can't wait to be back next week, and I will see you then. Until then, happy quilting.